Misconfiguration attacks. So misconfiguration attacks, we see these very, very often. The most common targets that we'll actually see this take place against is going to be web servers, application platforms, frameworks, databases, as well as hardware. Now, what a misconfiguration attack is that a lot of times, just because they don't know any better, people deploy applications, OSs, hardware devices. Again, I'll mention the database here in just a second. If somebody throws out an SQL database, there's some default settings that are in play that if you don't know what you're doing and you don't reconfigure, you end up creating some really good targets of opportunity. Now, I mentioned earlier that back in the old days, when you installed Microsoft Server 2000, you got a web server, and that web server was not locked down at all, and it created a lot of issues for us. Again, there are some defaults. When you install an Apache server, there's some defaults that are set up that if you don't change them, you're going to have some issues. Same thing with deploying out an application, and I'm not just talking necessarily about applications, desktop-based applications like Word or Excel, but server-based applications. I mentioned the databases before, SQL. What's the default password for SA? Yeah, something to think about, huh? Also, a hardware device. I think I mentioned this in a previous clip, but we'll talk about it in case you missed it. A lot of people go off and they buy a piece of hardware, and it has this nifty little wizard that walks them through to install. The example I always give is you run down to, I don't know, Best Buy or Tiger Direct or wherever, and you order in a new Linksys router. And most of the time we open those up, most end users, they look at the nice little glossy instruction that says, turn it on, push a button, see if you can connect up to it, and you're good to go. Well, again, what are the default passwords? There's actually a website out there that will show you default passwords, not just for the consumer-based products, but also default passwords for enterprise-based products such as switches and routers. Now, most of the time, these misconfiguration attacks take place because software is getting complex. And what do we talk about when it comes to complexity? That typically adds to our security issues. Now, the good news is that most of our software and hardware devices that we purchase today are pre-configured with some security mechanisms, or they have security mechanisms in play. The bad news is that there's a ton of settings that a lot of IT guys don't take the time to go through and properly configure or break open a manual to see what the different settings do. I know, real IT guys don't look at manuals, right? And that's where we come back to that same concept we talked previously, that training is a big issue when it comes to security. Not just the end user, but also when you guys get in a new device or a new piece of software you're going to deploy, I know it takes up a lot of your time and in some cases can cost you money to learn about the security mechanisms built into those devices and applications.